Today's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
Muckrake holds journalists accountable. This is Vanessa Beeley with Sonia Poulton discussing Aleppo and Israeli regression and aggression related to Syria.
Well, I mean, effectively, as I said, what's happening is that the Western cartel that has been trying to overthrow the Syrian government and has interfered in Syrian sovereign affairs since 1946. If you look at the history of CIA and MI6, interference, regime change, clandestine operations, covert operations, black ops, that's been going on since 1946 when Syria took its independence from French mandate. But if what I said basically is that the earthquake tragedy, whether manufactured, whether it's a natural tragedy, it doesn't really matter. The West, and that includes Israel in that cartel, and the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and Qatar, are basically weaponizing this tragedy to now try and increase pressure on the Syrian government and to topple it. So we've seen, as I've mentioned, an increase in military activity from ISIS, from the other terrorist groups in the north. Now, of course, what we've seen is Israel bombing Damascus. Yesterday morning, very early, around 1 a.m., we were woken up by the sounds of explosions in Damascus. Of course, what will Israel claim that they're targeting Iranian military bases? I drove yesterday to the civilian residential area that was targeted, killing 5 civilians, including 1 pharmacist, a cardiologist, and an engineer in that area, and it was a residential building. The Iranian Cultural Center is literally 4 buildings away, by the way, but we have various cultural centers in Damascus. They also targeted Damascus Citadel, including a museum that contains documents, historical documents that can't be replaced, an archaeological educational center that has some of the most up-to-date 3D printer, for example, was destroyed. How does this qualify as a military aggression? Right. And on top of which, Israel is not officially at war with Syria. So how does it, under any international law, how does it have the right to bomb a country that is literally just recovering from a double earthquake and multiple aftershocks and new earthquakes, collapsing buildings, even in Damascus? I went to see one yesterday in central Damascus that is being brought down because it was made fragile by the earthquake, even in Damascus, which is a long way from the epicenter in southern Turkey. So here you have Israel as an entirely, in my view, terrorist criminal entity bombing a country that is already reeling from 11 years regime change war waged by more than 70 countries against it.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Some of the most barbaric and savage sanctions, including the Caesar Act, which was brought in under the Trump administration, which effectively, all the sanctions are unilateral and they do affect the humanitarian sectors. But the Caesar law even targets countries that come to the assistance of Syria. Of course, the US made claims that it was lifting these sanctions for 6 months. It's so generous. But in reality, this is nothing more than a PR gesture, because they're refusing to work with the Syrian government. I mentioned that Assad is held responsible for the delay in sending aid to Idlib. It's Turkey that is preventing aid coming in through the Bab el-Hawa crossing between Turkey and Syria.
This is literally completely
different. It's Al-Qaeda which is refusing to allow Syrian aid convoys from Damascus to enter Idlib and is charging $10,000 per truck for it to enter and bring needed humanitarian aid to the Syrian people that are living under the occupation of Al-Qaeda in Idlib.
Do you know what? You've actually blown my mind this morning, which is confirmation from Legacy Clear that what Vanessa Beeley interested.
Yeah, I know. Can I ask?
You mean Erdogan's?
Erdogan's, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that just prior to the earthquake, there were 9 embassies that withdrew their staff from their embassies in Turkey on the basis that they were afraid of terrorist attacks.
Yep.
But that's quite interesting, as they are considered to be behind those terrorist attacks that were carried out on Turkish soil. When Erdogan was talking about negotiating with President Assad on the withdrawal of the armed groups from the areas where Turkey has control through armed group proxies, which is the majority of the northern border. So it's interesting. Erdogan, for me, plays a double game anyway. So I'm not convinced that he's also not involved in now the increased operations to put pressure on the Syrian military and the Syrian government. But at the same time, is there a risk of regime change in Turkey? Well, there already was an attempt in 2016. And it depends to what extent Erdogan is perceived as, of course, allying himself with Russia. He's made himself the middleman for Russian gas and oil in order to avoid sanctions on Russia when supplying Europe, for example. So Erdogan, you know, he benefits from almost every situation geopolitically in the region. And at some point, I guess you have to look at to what extent that balance is out of kilter with the US agenda. And when it is, then yes, of course, there's a high risk of regime change in Turkey. But right now, I would say Turkey is part of the capital, or the exploitation of the earthquake to particularly for Turkey, to renew their claim to Syrian territory. They've already effectively annexed much of the northern border on the basis that they're protecting themselves against the Kurdish Contras, which are backed by the US. Syria is incredibly complex because you have so many players involved in it, all with their own agenda regarding Syrian territory. So it does get incredibly messy when you're trying to sort of unravel it all. But yeah, I mean, I think you're correct. I think there is a danger or a risk of something being done in Turkey.
Yes, and also I think something that I remember seeing in Finland joining.
To just kind of clear, Vanessa, as long as we don't defame anybody's works.
Yeah.
And what is anti-Semitic? I mean,
to the outside world, the people who are, you know, plugged into the matrix or whatever, however you want to call it, they will automatically, the moment we start criticizing Zionism or Israel, it's like, oh, they must be anti-Semitic. We're all past that. We're adults around here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and what is anti-Semitic? I mean, Syrians are Semites, so actually Israel leading aggression against Syria, that's anti-Semitic also. So, you know, all of these labels, I mean, I must have been, I've been called everything from
You
father.
certainly.
And from Democracy Now!, this is entitled Silencing Critics of Israel. Biden pulls nomination of human rights lawyer for decrying apartheid. And we covered this, John Cavallaro's nomination being pulled. But this is him speaking about it.
Next up, we will criticize that. This
do not reflect appropriate.
Amnesty International's disqualified fellowship for former UCLA School of Law, also teaches human rights at Wesleyan University. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Jim. Thanks so much for being with us. Can you explain what happened? First, they're praising you, and then they are withdrawing your nomination from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights that you had previously served as president of.
Yeah, it really was quite a turn of events, and many thanks for having me on your program, Amy. So on Friday, State Department publicly announced that they had chosen me after an internal process to be the U.S. national candidate to serve as an independent expert. And let me underscore that, it's quite important, as an independent expert on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And as you noted, I had the privilege of serving on the Inter-American Commission in the past as a result of the nomination of the then Obama-Biden administration. So on Friday, they issue a statement. They talk about my background, my knowledge of Latin America, my fluency in other languages, et cetera, all factors in their choosing me to be the candidate. That's Friday. On Monday, I'm contacted by a reporter for a small outlet who has gone through my Twitter account and pulled up tweets of mine critical of Israeli governmental policies that amount to apartheid, and also critical of the role of money in politics, in particular through AIPAC and its donations to candidates who then in turn, unfortunately, I would say provide cover or reduce or eliminate any oversight by the United States government that contributes $4 billion a year to Israel of its human rights record. As a result of those tweets, there's some internal debate within state and maybe above state. This is, again, on Monday, the journalist contacts me, contacts State Department, publishes an article, I think, Monday afternoon. On Tuesday morning, I'm called by folks at the State Department and then by the ambassador to the Organization of American States and informed that the State Department is withdrawing my nomination. And it's made clear to me that it's because of the tweets and the statements that you indicated about my characterization of the situation in Israel and Palestine as apartheid, and the critique of the role of AIPAC funding in U.S. politics. Let me underscore two things, if I could, Amy. First, the role of a commissioner on the Inter-American Commission is not as representative of the United States if you're a U.S. national, or representative of Mexico if you're a Mexican national, and so forth for the states of the Americas. It's as an independent expert. The reason why they chose me is because for 3+ decades I have been an independent analyst expert. I've documented human rights primarily in Latin America, but also in other parts of the world, including Israel and Palestine. That's the first important point. And the second important point is that the decision here, what it in effect does is it requires loyalty to a U.S. position on what's happening in Israel and Palestine that is totally out of sync with what every major human rights organization has said. But notwithstanding it being out of sync, it is now in effect a requirement, not just for service within the U.S. government, but for service as an independent expert. And the last thing I would say is my views, based on my observation, my visits to Israel and Palestine, are entirely consistent with the views of Ken Roth, who was on your program when his fellowship was rescinded by the Kennedy School and then reversed, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the leading Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, Al-Haq, the Harvard Human Rights Program, and others who have documented what a human rights activist and practitioner and scholar and expert does is document conditions, compare those conditions to international human rights standards, and call out violations. And you can't pick and choose states. Nobody gets a free pass. The U.S.
has the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Get a free pass. Israel doesn't get a free pass. The Palestinian Authority doesn't get a free pass. Egypt, you could go on. No one gets a free pass. That's human rights documentation. That's what it has to be.
You mentioned Ken Roth, the former executive director at Human Rights Watch for almost 30 years. He tweeted about your case saying, quote, Biden's dropping of a candidate for a Latin American human rights post because he criticizes the Israeli government's apartheid, a completely mainstream position for any human rights defender, suggests that only Israeli apologists are acceptable, Roth said. And again, as you said, then we did, last month, the Harvard Kennedy School restored Ken Roth's fellowship after initially rescinding it over his criticism of Israeli human rights abuses. He appeared on Democracy Now! To warn against the chilling effect of Harvard's initial decision.
This is a very serious problem. I mean, it's not just a problem for me personally. This is not, impeding my career in a significant way. But I think about, first of all, the younger academics who don't have, the visibility that I do, who are going to take from this lesson the view that if you touch Israel, if you criticize Israel, that can be a career-killing move. You'll get canceled. And that's a disastrous signal to send.
To see that whole interview, you can go to democracynow.org. And again, he's now at the Harvard Kennedy School because there was such international outcry Harvard caved and re-offered him the position. But now I want to ask you, Jim Cavallaro, about Sarah Margon, who was nominated to serve as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Then she came under intense criticism from Senate Republicans, most notably Jim Risch of Idaho, for past tweets purportedly showing she supported BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, let me first say that Ken made an interesting point about young academics. We're seeing right now the unfair pressures that Professor Lara Sheehy is suffering at George Washington University because of her defense of the rights of Palestinians. She's facing, I think, spurious accusations, and she's under a significant amount of pressure. So let me just say that what Ken is talking about is quite real. And I, like Ken perhaps more because of his stature in the field of human rights, I have a platform. I have associations with leading institutions, Wesleyan University, I teach at Yale Law School, I teach at UCLA, I teach at Columbia Law School. And
You're
still, this has been a really difficult experience.
Long-time professor at Stanford Law School. So what do you do now? I mean, again,
yes, I'm sorry, I also taught at Harvard and Stanford Law Schools. Thank you. So, I'm sorry, Amy, the other question you had was about Sarah Margon, no?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, but just to complete with her, you have a situation where, again, her positions, her stated positions, working for Human Rights Watch on Israel and Palestine don't square with U.S. foreign policy, which again is out of line. The view of the United States is a non-mainstream view. It is an extreme view. It is not the majority view of those who have documented conditions in Israel and Palestine. And it's probably worth flagging here, if I could, what we're talking about. There's a legal definition of apartheid. It's domination by one group, one racial group or ethnic group over another. And that is quite clear in terms of land confiscations, in terms of expansions of settlements, in terms of the building permits that are denied to Palestinians, voting rights that are denied to Palestinians, freedom of movement that is denied to Palestinians, which highway you could be on. You can't be on them if you're Palestinian. You can't get a building permit. The situation in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. Human Rights Watch put out a dense report documenting this. So did Amnesty. So have other groups. But with Sarah Margon, her position was to serve in within state, but with a focus on human rights. That person should be a human rights expert. That's problematic when there's a litmus test on Israel and Palestine, which is not consistent with human rights, which is required in order to serve. It's honestly even more concerning when it's a litmus test as well to serve as an independent expert. I would not have represented the United States government, and I would have had absolutely no remit over Israel and Palestine. The Inter-American Commission oversees human rights in the Western Hemisphere. That's the other hemisphere, Israel and Palestine. So the expansion, unfortunately, of the areas in which one has to abide by U.S. policy, even as a human rights activist, even in Latin America, is really, really concerning.
Well, we're going to continue to follow this. Jim Cavallaro.
And we have Revenge of the Siths on the Russia-China relationship.
Rail. We have a little bit. I'm a little more. But we were talking.
Russia invaded the country February 24th of last year.
It's been a year already? Jesus fucking Christ.
Ukraine, however, still defying expectations as they fight to keep their land. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Russia
they haven't been defying expectations. They've been getting, and putting this eloquently, I'm not using proper, foreign policy terms. They're getting their shit pushed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this war would have been over if it wasn't for U.S. involvement.
Hey, did you guys see the casualty numbers that came out a couple days ago?
Is it high?
150K on the Ukrainian side.
But they died of COVID.
Oof.
Yeah, I know.
Worst.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's what they wrote on their fucking 7.62s and 5.45s.
All right, let's see here. All right, here we go. All right. What is this nothing you talk about?
Says Russia has suffered losses.
Oh, Anthony Blinken. I know Anthony Blinken. You know who Anthony Blinken is, right?
I don't know, but I don't know whoever lives in that apartment complex is not getting their security.
Anthony Blinken, the guy. You remember Anthony Blinken? He was in the Colgate Comedy Hour. He's in the band, the Blinken Boys. There he is. This guy's got it all undercover.
Oh, he had the bass with the notch in it.
Yeah. I know this isn't going to help.
I love how these shows now are just like, yeah, let's have a war criminal on to play guitar. No, for real. It's just so cash.
People that play guitar left-handed are of the devil.
And now has the majority of the country's troops on the ground in Ukraine. Russia is hoping to gain more territory before Ukraine receives advanced weapons from the West. Now, there's concerns China could be providing the Kremlin with weapons. Secretary Blinken says China would be crossing a red line.
Reports
if
say
they
Russia
do.
said, no thank you.
Hold on.
Oh, shit, they're going to be crossing a line, huh? And what are we going to do about it?
No, here, I want to hear that again. Hold on.
Weapons. Secretary Blinken says China would be crossing a red line.
So when we involve ourselves in a war that doesn't affect us in any way, we're not crossing a red line.
But when the country it borders the two countries,
picks a side, the side that you don't like.
That would be like China telling us, don't meddle in Mexico's affairs.
Yeah. Go fuck yourself. How's that? And also, you're right. That's crossing the line. Flying spy balloons over our fucking country, buying land near Air Force bases to clearly fucking spy on us, having your fucking agents sleep with our stupid congressmen and try. No, that's not crossing a red line. This is the line that we're crossing. Okay, sounds good.
Fine, if they do. China's president promised to support Russia before its invasion of Ukraine. Their relationship appears to have gotten stronger since then.
Yeah, did you see the video of them making pancakes together?
What?
What?
No.
Find it. Give me a second.
Man,
Now, this is obvious.
Basically, just like tiny pancakes.
To give you context, this is not from this year. So just so you know, but if you're wondering how close their relationship is, sorry, I apologize. Misinformation tag I'm getting on this video. They're making crepes together. Not
they
pancakes.
are making crepes. All right.
Yes.
They're basically just like tiny pancakes.
I apologize.
You're right. Okay, say you like tiny pancakes.
You know, that is a really good deal. Like, he's giving you an out.
He really is giving you an out, man. I'm not doing it.
Bro, take it. Take it.
No, he asked him. He asked him at the end of the scene, he goes, what do you think I should do? And he goes, nah, don't do it.
Yeah, that's right. I want to point something out. These two guys making crepes share nuclear weapon codes.
Over crepes.
Don't worry, we're gonna be fine.
Well, of course they're making crepes. They have eggs to enjoy them with. We don't.
We don't have eggs. Oh fuck.
You're cracking Russian eggs is like opening a coconut.
Yeah, it's really bad.
When do I get to partake in this sin pancake?
One of my favorite things was like, apparently Putin is like he loves dogs. Like he fucking loves dogs, right?
So does the other guy.
Yeah, but he likes him for dinner. So when this same visit, when he picked up a dog, but he picked it up by its scruff, Putin like immediately ran over and took the dog and started petting it like, oh, okay, the dog's fine. The dog's fine.
Yeah. Fucking the Chinaman just does not know how to deal with animals at all.
Well, yeah, he does.
The dog up by the scruff of its neck, and Putin was like, hey, give me that.
He knows how to. All right, watch this space. We'll be back with our bonus hour.
Friday's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
So we have one more muckrake segment. This is Syriana analysis on Biden and Zelensky.
Pipeline because our economy is being destroyed. The investors are running away to China. There are so many companies moving their assets to China, to the United States, because there is no investment environment here anymore. The energy prices are too high for these companies to survive. This was the goal of the Americans. They did it on purpose against Germany. It's unbelievable. I was watching Seymour Hersh on Russell Brand's show, and I will show you a few minutes of this. He's explaining why Biden himself ordered this attack against.
They could take photographs of what a satellite can see much better. But basically, the last way, the unnamed car-like with an American press so full of it, it turns out there's the federal government has a contract with the meteorology department or whatever it is, weather department at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, and that is one cold place. It's way up there. Also, most of the classes are underground. You go underground to classes. I've spoken there. I know about this firsthand. And over the Arctic Circle is everybody flies the polar route from Asia to America, and there's no weather station there. So the university has these little vehicles that goes and reports. Pilots want to know if there's any unusual weather going on. That's what you have to do, and they are reporters of that information. And that's what was one of those units that is sent up by a university but paid by the government to go over the Arctic Circle and report on, in case there's an extreme wind. I don't know what the cliche is when the wind goes down in a downdraft, and since there's no official station there, who wants to be there to run a weather station? And so they're basically a remote weather station. That's what they shot down. Whether they're going to talk about it in the next couple of weeks, and we put about actually, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars into a new fighter, the F-22, that's coming online. We had one called the F-1. We put $203 billion in to make about 100 of them. About in the 80s, so far 7 exist. It's just money just floats. But we paid a lot of money for the F-22, and its first kill was the first balloon. That one came over, was discovered over Montana, and the pilot. And I'd like to think that he knows exactly what he's doing. When he landed, in World War II, 90, when they joined, in the documents, the agreement we made with the Gorbachev, it wasn't a treaty, but it was an understanding. No offensive weapons, there's no question about that. It's a fact that can be just diverted. It'll take some time, half a day, but you can fire your 7 minutes from Moscow. And that's another reality. So it's what I hate to see in the paper, one of the leading neocons who got non-existent relation. The first thing they do is they meet in the Secretary of State things. The initial agreement, the initial decision to plan for the pipeline was an option for leverage for the president against Putin. It was started a year ago, 13 months ago in December, and it bled over to early this year. And the idea was to ask the community for ideas. I wrote about this, whether kinetic or non-kinetic, and the word was kinetic. That means we're going to hurt somebody. And so, of course, it emerged, we're going to take out the pipelines. We've been complaining about the pipelines for a dozen years. The first one, Nord Stream 1, and the new one. The new pipeline is interesting because the first one was cut off by Russia. The second one was cut off by the Germans. They put a sanction on it. So Germany always had the option of opening up the pipeline anytime it wanted. And who cares about the pipeline in summer? But comes fall, comes winter, and that's when you're going to need it. The Russian natural gas has been supplying Germany and Western Europe with cheap gas for a dozen years, and the economy's boomed based on cheap gas. Now, Europe's suffering. It's getting cold. They had a mild winter, but it's getting very cold now. The leading companies are all getting, the price of gas is going up enormously. Companies like BASF, which is the largest chemical company in Germany in the world, has been talking to China about maybe moving some assets there. The consequences of knocking out the pipeline economically are disastrous. As you said, Norway's getting more gas, and Norway was a big player in us with the project. But the key thing is, when the president told the intelligence community, I want to see if I have an option. I think the thought of, and my understanding was, the thought of the community was, we're going to do what the president wants. That's the whole idea of having a CIA. I mean, if you're the president of the United States right now, this guy can't get a thing through Congress. But tomorrow, if he wants to, he can take a walk in the Rose Garden with the CIA director, and somebody can get hurt the next day. That makes you feel pretty good, particularly if you can't have your way anywhere else. And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons I think the CIA is a very dangerous community, but full of a lot of smart people. Anyway, it was always to be an option. And what happened is, he didn't exercise it. They were going to do it at one point when they had cover in this summer. They had cover because of there was a big, the Baltic Sea is not there's no oil there. And the idea of having a bunch of deep sea divers start digging around would have been exposed any problem, any thought of getting away with taking out the pipelines. It just would have been too obvious, too seen. But there was an exercise, NATO exercise last summer. There's been one every summer for 22 years now in the Baltic, and then maybe you could slide it in then. That was the idea. But the president didn't pull a whistle then. In late September, he did it. And by that time, the community itself had thought there was no reason to do it anymore. You know, it was there as a potential threat, but he'd already started the war. And by September, the one thing that was interesting, I've always been among a group of journalists and people in the community who have been very skeptical about the chances of Ukraine to win a war against Russia. And, you know, if you know the history, when in Stalingrad, when the Germans got their great defeat, the Russians were losing 2,400 dead and wounded every 4 hours in the final days of the battle, and one just kept on going. I mean, they are tough. And so, in the war against Ukraine, I'm sure in the beginning it's correct that Putin or his generals underestimated the willingness of the Ukrainians to commit hara-kiri, as they have been. But by September, it was clear there was real trouble. Among other things, the corruption was so wild among the top, even including Zelensky. They're all fighting for what percentage of the money they're going to steal. There's a lot of fighting and brooding about that, even today. And so it was a corrupt regime. It never was going to be accepted into NATO, and it wasn't going to win the war. And so Joe, then in late September, wants to hit, and he gets it. And at that point, I think that there were people in the intelligence community who thought it was, at that point, that didn't make sense. That was just crazy. And what's he doing? He's throwing in, for whatever he can. The fear he had was that since Germany controlled the new pipeline, Nord Stream 2, the one that was just built and was just stopped, they just finished it in 2020. And it was full of gas even then. The gas that came up it's a 750-mile pipeline from Germany all the way to near St. Petersburg in right up near Estonia, the border with Russia and Estonia. So the long pipeline was full of methane gas. That's what the gas is, methane. And anyway, and that's what bubbled up. It wasn't pumping any. It just stored there. It would have been perfectly safe. And so I guess the Biden's thought was, I want to keep any possibility that the Germans and the rest of the Western Union, which is going to start getting cold. He did it in late September. Will open up the pipeline and then be at the mercy of Russia. In other words, the way they put it, that pipeline, the Russian gas, was a weapon for the Russians, a weapon. And once you took away that weapon, West Germany, if West Germany cannot open up the pipeline anymore, and Germany rather, and the European allies of NATO, well, then they'll keep on supporting us in the war. They won't have the option of saying we quit. We'd rather have Russian gas than join you in a war that you can't win. And that's what I think the dominant thinking was. Yeah.
All right. Watch this space and remember, your engagement through a like, share, subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.